My name is Olivia Sorensen. I'm 42 years old, and my mom has missed every single one of my son's 18 birthdays. So when she ordered him to cancel the graduation trip he'd spent 2 years saving for, to babysit for my sister, my quiet, careful boy did something nobody in this family had ever done. He told her no. She sent him a text that ended with the line, "After everything this family has done for you." He answered with one screenshot. No caption, no explanation. An hour later, my sister called me, crying so hard the only word I could make out was camp. But the screenshot was just the opening move, because what my mother did at his graduation party, in front of 40 guests, forced me into a choice I'd been running from since before my son was born. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet people find their voice. Grab your coffee and settle in, because this one starts with a birthday cake and ends with a question I never thought I'd have to ask my own mother. Tell me where you're listening from today. Drop a comment below, and if stories like this one speak to you, be sure to subscribe. You don't want to miss what she did when the guilt stopped working. Let me start with the last birthday, because it explains all the others. In March, my son Eli turned 18. We did it simple, the way he likes things. Backyard, burgers, his 3 best friends. My husband Mark burning the first round of buns like always. My mother, Judith, had been invited a month out. She'd said, "We'll see, honey. You know how things get." I knew exactly how things get. At 6:40, right as Mark carried out the cake, my phone lit up. Mom. I stepped away from the table because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. Her voice had that breathless pitch I could pick out of a stadium crowd. "Her heart medication," she said. The pharmacy in Kettering closed at 7:15. She couldn't reach her doctor. She was down to nothing. Could I come? I'm a pediatric nurse. I've spent 17 years learning what an emergency sounds like. And still, when it's your own mother saying the word heart, the training loses to the umbilical cord every time. I drove 12 minutes to her pharmacy, picked up the bag, drove it to her house, and got back to my own backyard at 8. The candles had been blown out. The wish had been wished. Eli was scraping frosting off the pan with a plastic fork, and he smiled at me and said, "It's fine, Mom. It always is." Here's the part I didn't tell anyone that night. When the pharmacist handed me the bag, I checked the label out of habit. It was a routine refill. Standard schedule. By the count on the bottle, she still had almost 2 weeks of pills sitting at home. I put that fact in a drawer in the back of my mind. The way you do. The drawer was getting full. You should know who I am in this family, because it's the whole story. I'm the oldest daughter, the steady one. I work nights on the pediatric floor at a children's hospital in Dayton, and I'm good at my job for the same reason I was good at being Judith Sorensen's daughter. I show up. I stay calm. I absorb. My dad, Frank, was the buffer in our house. He pinned road maps to the garage wall and made my mother laugh and quietly smoothed the edges off her moods. 6 years ago, a stroke took him in an afternoon, and after the funeral, something in Mom reorganized itself. Every piece of family news started flowing through her. Every plan, every invitation, every version of every event. And the emergencies started. Small ones, big ones, always urgent, always somehow landing on me, because my sister Renee lived an hour away with babies, and I was the nurse 12 minutes down the road. I want to be fair. I'm not telling you about a monster. I'm telling you about the most competent woman I've ever known, a woman who ran a school front office for 30 years, who can still ice a cake from memory. But there was a sentence she used, and she'd been using it my whole life. The first time I remember, I was 25, a new mom, begging off one Christmas because I'd worked 3 night shifts back to back. She went quiet on the phone, and then she said it, soft as a hymn. "After everything this family has done for you." I drove up that Christmas. I drove up every Christmas. It took me 17 more years and one screenshot to understand what that sentence actually was. Not love, an invoice. Now let me tell you about the trip so you understand what my mother was actually asking him to cancel. Eli has worked at Hartman's Hardware since he was 16. Registers, stockroom, Saturday mornings unloading mulch in the rain. He kept a folder on his desk labeled June, and inside it, 2 years of planning. He and 3 friends were going to spend 9 days on the trails at Grayson Highlands in Virginia, June 12th through the 20th. He'd saved $1,900 of his own money. He'd budgeted food to the granola bar. On the inside of his bedroom door hung a trail map with the whole route highlighted in yellow, dates written down the side in Sharpie, and at the bottom, in his blocky handwriting, Day 9, Mount Rogers. There was more writing on it than a hike. Eli was a finalist for the Halverson Scholarship, the one the Regional Manufacturers Association gives out, the one that would cover the tuition gap at Purdue that our savings couldn't. The final interview was scheduled for June 24th, 4 days after he got back. His counselor told him the panel always asks the same core question. Tell us about something you planned yourself and carried out, start to finish. My son had been building his answer since 10th grade, and the answer had a yellow line running through it. Everybody in the family knew about the trip. Mark checked the weather for Virginia like it was a second job. Renee's kids called it Eli's Mountain. My mother was the only person who never asked about it. Not the route, not the friends, not one question in 2 years. I thought she just wasn't interested. It hadn't occurred to me yet that she'd been interested the entire time, the way a chess player is interested in your queen. Then there's my sister. Renee is 38, 4 years younger than me, and she lives in Columbus, about 70 minutes east, with her 2 kids. Maddie is 6. Sam is 3. Her divorce went final a year and a half ago, and her ex moved to Tampa, which means his weekends with the kids happen mostly in theory. She works at an insurance office, and this spring she got the kind of chance single moms pray for. A promotion, real money, an office with a door. All she had to do was complete a licensing course, 1 mandatory week in Cincinnati, June 15th through the 19th. I knew all of this the way I knew everything about my sister by then, which is to say, secondhand. Through Mom. That's the part I need you to see, because I didn't see it for years. Somewhere along the way, Renee and I had stopped calling each other. Not a fight. Nothing you could point to. It was just easier to get the news from Mom, who talked to each of us daily and passed everything along, always with a little color added. Liv is exhausted. Don't bother her. Renee is a mess. She can't handle one more thing. Your sister said a strange thing about your casserole. Little threads of static year after year, until the direct line between us went quiet and every word traveled through her. I used to tell people my mother was the bridge of this family. She loved that. She'd repeat it at church. It took me until this June to understand what she actually was. Not a bridge, a toll booth. And that week in Cincinnati, the one Renee needed so badly, was about to become the most expensive crossing of all our lives. Here's what my quiet support of my mother actually looked like on paper, because support is a soft word and the numbers are not. Since 2019, her electric and water bills have come out of my checking account on autopay. She never asked outright. There was a crisis, of course, a scary winter bill, and I set it up temporarily, and temporarily turned 6 years old. In 2021, it was the roof. $4,000, cash, because her roofer didn't take checks. I asked one time if I could see the invoice. Just once, and gently, the way I'd ask a patient's parent about a bruise. She didn't yell. She did something better. She waited until Thanksgiving, till the whole table was seated, and told everyone, eyes shining, that she never imagined a daughter of hers would bill her own mother. My Aunt Patty didn't pass me the potatoes for 2 years, so I stopped asking. I paid quietly instead, and I told myself what every daughter like me tells herself, that it was cheaper than the fight. And listen, I'm a nurse, not a fool. I saw the shape of it. But every crisis arrived engineered to be unverifiable and urgent, a burst pipe at 11 at night, chest pressure on a Sunday, a furnace smell in January. You can't audit a phone call at midnight. You can't tell your widowed mother to get a second opinion on her own heart. It was Mark who finally said the quiet thing out loud last winter, doing taxes at the kitchen table. He put down his pen and said, "Liv, 6 years of emergencies, and not one of them has ever happened during her church committee week." I laughed. Then I didn't. Then I went and looked at the calendar. And he was right. The call came on a Tuesday in the middle of May. I was unloading groceries, phone wedged against my shoulder, and my mother's voice came through bright and brisk. Her committee voice, the one that has never once been asked a question it didn't already have an answer to. "Good news," she said. "It's all settled. Eli will stay with Renee's children June 15th through the 19th. Renee is desperate, poor thing. That course is mandatory, and family steps up. I told her she could count on us." I stood there holding a cold jar of pickles, doing the math. June 15th through the 19th, dead center of the trip. "Mom," I said, "Eli's in Virginia those dates. The trail trip. He's been planning it for 2 years." There was the smallest pause, and I swear it wasn't surprise. It was a step in a recipe. "A hiking trip," she said, and the warmth drained from the words like a tide going out. "Olivia, your sister's life is falling apart, and he wants a vacation. He's 18. There will be other mountains." I said the interview was 4 days after he got back, that the trip was practically his application, and she laughed. One short note. "The scholarship people will be more impressed by a young man who puts family first. It's settled, honey. I already told Renee." That phrase snagged on something in my chest. Already told Renee. How did my mother know Renee's course dates before Renee had said anything to me about needing help? I turned around to put the pickles down, and that's when I saw Eli in the kitchen doorway, still in his orange Hartman's vest, car keys in his hand, and I could tell by his face that he'd heard every word. Eli held out his hand for the phone. I want to be honest. My stomach dropped. Because in our family, you didn't talk back to Grandma. You managed her. You rerouted around her like construction on the interstate. He put the phone on speaker, set it on the counter, and said, "Hi, Grandma, it's Eli." I heard. "I want to answer for myself." Her voice went to syrup instantly. "Sweetheart. Big boy now. Family needs you." He let her finish. Then he said, calm as a scale, "Grandma, I leave June 12th. I planned this for 2 years and I paid for it myself, and my scholarship interview is on the 24th. I can help Aunt Renee another week. Any other week. But the answer for that week is no." Silence. "I'm sorry," he added, "but it's still no." I want you to understand what that sentence was in our house. I was 42 years old and I had never said it. Not once. Not clean like that. Without an excuse attached. Without a doctor's note from life. My son said no the way you'd read a street sign, like it was simply information about the world. The silence on the counter stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When my mother finally spoke, her voice wasn't angry. It was pleasant. It was pressed and folded like a church dress. "I see," she said. "Well, I hope the mountain is worth it to you, Eli." And she hung up. Mark found me staring at the phone and asked what happened, and I heard myself say, "My mother didn't argue." He didn't get it. He hadn't grown up in her weather. In 20 years I had never once heard Judith Sorensen not argue. That's how I knew this was war. It took about 48 hours for the artillery to open up. It never comes from her directly, you understand. That's not how she works. It comes from the choir. Aunt Patty called first, my mother's younger sister, who has never in my hearing started a sentence with hello. "I just think it's sad," she began, "that a boy would abandon 2 babies for a camping trip. Your mother is beside herself. She cried through the whole 11 o'clock service." Then came the church ladies. Then a cousin in Indiana I hear from at funerals, who texted, "Wow. Selfish much?" With a period on it, like a nail. By the weekend, the story had a shape, and the shape was this. Renee, the brave single mother, had begged for help. Eli, the pampered prince, had volunteered and then abandoned her babies to go play in the woods, and I, who had apparently raised him to worship himself, was letting it happen. I knew the machine was running because the story arrived everywhere at once. Fully formed. the same phrases in different mouths. Abandon the babies. After everything. I did what I always do, which is nothing loud. I corrected facts in a level voice. I said, "That's not what happened." Approximately 40 times into approximately 11 phone calls. It's like bailing a lake. But here's the detail that kept me up that week, staring at the ceiling fan. In all that noise from all those directions, one phone never rang. Renee's. My sister, the person at the actual center of the actual problem, the one whose kids supposedly stood abandoned, had not called me once. In our family, silence was never peace. Silence was the sound of someone being loaded like a weapon. She called on Sunday night, and she skipped hello too. "I need you to explain your son to me," Renee said, and her voice had a wobble in it that was half fury, half hurt. "Because I don't recognize this kid. You don't do that. You don't volunteer and then dump somebody's children a month out." Everything in me stopped. "Renee, back up. Volunteered?" "Oh, don't," she snapped. "Mom told me weeks ago. She said Eli heard about my course and offered on his own, and she was so proud of him, and I built everything around it. Live. I turned down the spot my coworker found because I had family, and now, a month before, he decides a hike matters more than my kids." I stood in my dark kitchen with my heart going like a triage monitor, sorting what I knew. Eli had first heard about that week from my phone call in this kitchen. I'd watched him hear it. There was no version where he'd offered anything to anyone weeks ago. Somebody had built my sister a story, beam by beam, and then handed her the match. "Renee," I said, slow. "Who told you Eli volunteered? Walk me through it." Exact words. "Why are you being weird? Mom told me. Why would she—" And then Renee stopped, and the line went so quiet I could hear Sam's cartoon in the background. When she spoke again, the fury had a crack in it. "Liv, he didn't volunteer? He found out the same minute I did." We sat in that silence together, 70 miles apart. Somebody had told my sister a story, and standing in the dark I started wondering, for the first time in my life, how many of the stories I'd been handed had come off the same shelf. I did what I do at work when a chart doesn't add up. I stopped arguing with the chart and started checking the machines. "Okay," I said. "Forget whose fault. Let's solve the actual week. What if I pay half for a sitter or a day camp? There's gotta be a summer program with room." Renee made a sound that was almost a laugh. "You think I didn't try camp? Liv, I had camp. Little Pines, 6 blocks from my house. I registered in February, paid the deposit. Maddie had a shirt. In April, they called to confirm my cancellation. My cancellation. I never canceled anything. They said the spot was released and the summer was full. Waitlist only. I begged. I cried in the parking lot. Nothing." The back of my neck went cold, one vertebra at a time. "You never told me that." "I told Mom," she said, and there it was again. The toll booth, standing right in the middle of the road. She said these things happen. Computers, overworked staff. She said it was a sign I was taking on too much, and maybe the promotion wasn't meant to be. I asked the nurse question. "Renee, did they refund your deposit?" Papers shuffled. A long pause, her breath changing as she scrolled her banking app. "There's a credit in April. $85. I never noticed. That whole month was daycare bills and the lawyer. Somebody had canceled my sister's childcare, in her name, in April, 2 months before a crisis that hadn't happened yet. I didn't say the thought out loud. It was too big, and it had my mother's handwriting all over it, and I had no proof of anything except a cold neck and $85. "Liv," Renee said, "why do you sound like that?" While I was quietly checking machines, my mother went to see my son at work. Tuesday afternoon, Hartman's Hardware, Register 2. Dale Hartman told me most of it later, and Eli filled in the rest, even voiced, like a witness who'd already made peace with testifying. She came in wearing her good blue cardigan and bought a single sponge, and then she stood at his register with a line forming and began the recital. Who paid for his summer camp when he was 8? who knitted the hat he wore in that photo everyone loves, who drove through snow, it's always snow in the recital, when he had the croup, which, for the record, was me, but details have never survived contact with my mother's memory. Her voice never rose. It's a lovely voice. It just kept coming, item after item, like a receipt printing, and every item ended the same way, with her hand flat on the counter and the same words. Family is the only thing that will ever catch you, Eli. After everything this family has done for you. My son, bless him, bagged her sponge. He said, I know, Grandma, and I'll show up for family my whole life. I'll help Aunt Renee any other week she needs. Just not that week. She looked at him, Dale said. The way you'd look at a vending machine that ate your dollar. Then Dale walked over, friendly as Sunday, and said, Judith, good to see you. We've got a line. And she smiled at everyone and left. That night, Eli came into the kitchen while I was packing my work bag. He stood there a minute and then he asked, quiet, Mom, has Grandma ever had an emergency that turned out to be nothing? And I realized, with a feeling like missing a stair, that my son wasn't asking a question. He was checking his math. If you've ever sat in your car outside your own mother's house, doing slow math on 20 years of emergencies, I need you to hear the next part of this story. And do me a favor. Tell me in the comments when you first noticed the pattern in your family, because somebody reading tonight thinks they're the only one, and they need to see your comment more than you know. All right, back to that week, because that's when the stakes stopped being about a hike. Thursday, the letter came confirming Eli's interview slot. June 24th, 9 in the morning, 3rd floor of the Halverson building downtown. His counselor, Mrs. Okafor, called me to make sure we understood what finalist meant. 11 kids left, she said, for 3 awards. Full tuition gap, 4 years, renewable. And then she said the thing I already knew. The panel's favorite question is follow-through. They want a project the student planned and finished on their own. Eli's essay was the trip, Olivia. The budget spreadsheets, the route cards, 2 years of it. If the trip doesn't happen, he's presenting a plan he abandoned. So there it was. Cancel the trip, and he wouldn't just lose 9 days on a mountain. He'd sit in front of that panel with his story amputated. That same night, Mark came in from the garage with his jaw set funny and told me he'd run into Renee's former mother-in-law at the supply house, of all places. Sweet woman, still close to Renee, still takes the kids some weekends. She'd been planning to cover part of that June week, she told Mark, until Judith called her in April. Called to thank her warmly and let her know Renee had it all arranged. Family had stepped up. She was off the hook. She'd thought it was strange, she told Mark, since Renee never mentioned it. April again. Everything traced back to April, 2 months before the crisis, like frost lines around a leak. I stood at the sink washing the same pan until the water ran cold, and I thought, someone has been gardening this emergency since spring. That Friday she came to our house, unannounced, to talk some sense. I made coffee because my hands needed a job. She didn't drink hers. She walked down the hall as if inspecting a rental and stopped at Eli's open door, and for a long moment she just stood there, looking at the trail map taped inside it. 9 days of yellow highlighter, dates down the margin in Sharpie. His blocky letters at the bottom. Day 9, Mount Rogers. I watched my mother's face do something I'd never seen it do. It went unguarded. Maps, she said, almost to herself. Your father used to pin maps in the garage, places we never went. For 1 second I could see all the way down to some room in her I'd never been allowed into. Then the shade came down, and she did something odd. She raised her phone and took a picture of the map, 1 crisp click, then turned and told me the coffee was too strong, and left. I stood in the hallway wondering what a 67-year-old woman wanted with a photograph of her grandson's hiking route. I found out later she'd been showing it around church, and the cousins like an exhibit. 9 whole days for strangers on a mountain. Look, it's in yellow. And not 1 afternoon for his own blood. Evidence for the choir. But that night, something else happened. And this is the part everything after hangs on. At 9:47, the family group chat, the one labeled cousins, pinged once. A message from Mom. And then, before I could reach my phone on the charger, it was gone. Deleted. 90 seconds. Maybe less. Alive in the world. I saw the notification and then a gray line that said this message was removed, and I thought, wrong chat. She's texting about somebody's potluck. Nobody in the family saw what it said. That's what I believed for the next 3 weeks. But one person in my house sleeps with his phone on his chest. The following week she raised the stakes the old way. 11 at night, my phone buzzing on the nightstand, her voice small and frightened in a way that grabs you by the spine, pressure in her chest, a tingle down her arm. I'm a nurse. I know exactly what those words are worth at 11 at night from a 67-year-old widow, and I know exactly what they cost me every time they turn out to be weather. You go anyway. You always go anyway, because the one night you don't is the night it's real, and I would not survive being wrong. So I drove the 12 minutes, and we spent the night in the emergency department at Kettering, and they ran the blood work and the EKG, and everything came back clean as new snow. The attending was kind about it. Anxiety can produce genuine symptoms, he said, and he's right. It can. And I nodded along with my badge, practically burning a hole in my purse. Here's what that clean night cost. It was the night of the senior awards ceremony, the one where they announced the Halverson finalists on stage, in the gym, with the parents standing up while people clapped. Mark went. He filmed it on his phone, Eli in his good shirt, squinting into the lights, and an empty aisle seat where I was supposed to be. I watched the video at 4 in the morning in an ER parking lot. And one more thing, and I want you to sit with it the way I had to. Around 2 in the morning, between tests, my mother, gowned and wired and supposedly at death's door, rolled her head toward me on the pillow, and in a perfectly ordinary voice asked, "So, did Renee call you about June yet?" The tests were clean, but sitting in that plastic chair I started running tests of my own, backward, over 20 years. I came home the next morning, gray as dishwater, and found Eli at the table eating cereal before his shift. I apologized for missing the ceremony. He shrugged it off, said Dad filmed it, said the lights were dumb anyway. And then he sat there a second, spoon down, doing the thing he does before he says something he's rehearsed. "Mom, I want to show you something. Don't be mad that I never showed you before." He slid his phone across the table. It was a note, the kind you keep in your pocket app, and the title of it was G's Emergencies. It had been started 4 years ago, when he was 14. 18 lines. One for every birthday of his life, researched backward with dates. My careful spreadsheet-hearted boy. And next to each one, the crisis that had swallowed it. Age 10, the flooded kitchen, and a note. Asked Mr. Beckett next door. He never saw a plumber's truck. Age 16, the water heater, and a note. No permit, no receipt. Heater looks original. Age 18, this March, the prescription run, and a note. Heard Mom tell Dad the bottle had 12 days left. I read it twice. My hands were not entirely steady, and my son watched me read it with the particular gentleness of a kid who has already cried about a thing you're only now discovering. "I'm not mad at her," he said. "I stopped expecting her a long time ago. I made the list so I'd stop wondering if it was me." I looked at my 18-year-old across a cereal bowl and understood that he had known my mother longer than I had. He'd only needed 14 years to see her. I'd been inside the aquarium my whole life, explaining that the water was normal. "Okay," I said. "You're not the only one keeping notes now." He almost smiled. There was one thing he still wasn't showing me. I could feel it. I called Renee directly the next night, no switchboard, and I came with logistics, because love in our family had always needed a cargo manifest. "Here's my offer. Wednesday afternoon I'm off. I drive to Columbus, pick up Maddie and Sam. They stay here through Sunday. Mark's grilling. Eli's gone, but the pool pass works. And I'll cover a sitter for Monday through Wednesday morning. You do your course. Every box gets checked." There was a silence I didn't understand. Then Renee said, in a voice like she was reading off a card someone had handed her, "Mom said you'd do this." I waited. She said you'd swoop in with some half version so you could look reasonable. She said it's scraps, Liv. That taking it means letting you and Eli win, and that if I hold the line, the family will finally step up the way it's supposed to. I sat down slowly on the edge of the tub, phone against my ear, and I had the strangest sensation, like watching a surgical drape pulled back. There it was, the machinery, running in real time, in my sister's mouth. Not Renee's thoughts, installed thoughts. "Renee," I said, "listen to yourself. I'm offering to take your kids for 5 days and pay for a sitter, and somebody has coached you to hear it as an attack." She was quiet a long time. When her voice came back, it was small, the little sister voice from the top bunk, and what it asked broke my heart and started mending it in the same second. "Liv, did Eli ever actually volunteer? Because Mom swears. She swears on Daddy." Sunday dinners of my childhood went through me like a chill. "No, honey," I said. "He never did." And 70 miles away, I heard my sister start to understand. 2 days before graduation, my mother called me with her final offer, except she'd never once in her life called it an offer. "I've spoken to Pastor Rick," she opened, "which is how you know the choir has been fully briefed. Everyone agrees this has gone on long enough. Tell Eli to do the right thing, and all of this unpleasantness disappears. Or don't, and you can explain to people why I wasn't at that graduation." There it was. Attendance at her only grandson's graduation, offered like a hostage exchange, and something in me, worn smooth by that ER night and that list with its 18 lines, just stopped negotiating. "Mom," I said, "you've missed 18 birthdays. Why would graduation be different?" I heard her breath change. I'd gone off script. The script says I apologize for her feelings and find a middle. "Excuse me?" she said, and I said, tired. "You heard me." And we hung up on each other, and my hands shook for an hour, which is embarrassing to admit at 42, and also the truest thing I can tell you. So she went around me. At 8:12 that night, Eli's phone lit up on the kitchen counter, next to the graduation programs. A text from Grandma. He read it standing up. I watched his face and read it upside down, the way mothers read everything. It was long. It was beautifully built, I'll give her that. Gilt with load-bearing walls, his dead grandfather in it, my nursing shifts in it, Renee's babies in it, and it ended, of course, the way everything in our family ends. "After everything this family has done for you." Eli stood very still. Then he sat down, opened his photo album, scrolled back 3 weeks like a man who knew the exact drawer, tapped once, and hit send. No caption. One screenshot. He put the phone face down on the counter and picked up his fork. I didn't know yet what he'd sent. I want that on the record, because people ask me later why I let him, and the answer is, there was nothing to let. My son had already done it, quietly, between bites of spaghetti, the way he does everything. What I saw was this: his phone, face down, his shoulders, easy for the first time in 3 weeks. And when I asked what he'd texted back, he said, "Just something true," which from Eli is an entire congressional testimony. Across town, though, something had gone off the rails, and you could feel it in the silence. Grandma always answers. Grandma answers texts like a woodpecker. 8:30. Nothing. On his screen, when he finally flipped it, you could see the little line that said Grandma was typing, and then it vanished. Typing. Vanished. I've stood in rooms where a monitor does that. It's never nothing. At 8:40, my phone rang once and stopped. Mom. She'd hung up before I could answer, which had never happened in recorded history. At 9:10, it rang again, and this time it wasn't her. Renee. I picked up and my sister was crying, not angry crying, not frustrated crying, a kind I hadn't heard from her since Dad died, gulping, drowning, crying, and I could only catch pieces. She, and the whole time, and the camp. Live. The camp. My skin went cold, arm to arm. Renee, slow down. What about the camp? But she couldn't get there yet, and while she was trying, I looked up, and Eli was standing in the kitchen doorway with his phone in his hand and an expression I'd never seen on him. Older than 18 by a mile. "Mom," he said, "there's something I should have shown you 3 weeks ago." He set the phone in my hand the way you hand somebody a sleeping baby or a live grenade. It was a screenshot of the cousins' group chat. Timestamp, 9:47 at night, 3 Fridays ago. The night of the map. A gray bubble from Mom. The message she'd deleted inside of 2 minutes. The one I'd assumed was somebody's potluck. My mother types long, but I'll read it to you the way it's burned into me. Renee is in a panic about the June week, just like I said she would be. I told her Eli volunteered. Better he learns family comes first while he's young. Don't mention the camp. I canceled that back in April. If I'm the one who fixes this, maybe this family remembers who they'd be without me. They only come when something is broken. She'd meant it for Carol Hendricks, her best friend since high school. In her contacts, Carol H. sits one line above cousins. One fat thumb, one wrong tap, 90 seconds in the wild. Every adult in that chat had been asleep or working. But a boy who'd just turned 18, a boy who sleeps with his phone on his chest, had felt it buzz, read it, understood in one read exactly what it was, screenshotted it, and said nothing for 3 weeks. "Why didn't you show me?" I whispered. He looked at the floor. "Because it would break you," he said. And I figured I could just go on the trip and let it stay buried. But then she sent me that text. "Mom?" She put Grandpa in it. On the phone, Renee had finally found her voice, and what she'd found out was this. She'd called Little Pines that evening about next summer, and the director, apologetic, confused, had pulled the April record. The cancellation call had come from Renee's own emergency contact, her mother. "She watched me cry about that camp," Renee kept saying. "Liv. She watched me cry for a month." Renee and I stayed on the phone for 2 hours that night, the longest we'd talked in 10 years, and we did the thing you do after a diagnosis. We went back through the chart. The flooded kitchen the year Eli turned 10, when she called me sobbing at his party. The one Mr. Beckett never saw a plumber for. The water heater with no receipt. The prescription with 12 days left in the bottle. The course dates she'd known before I did. The mother-in-law called off in April. The camp killed in April. Some of it was real. That's the terrible part. The broken wrist in 2022 was real. I set the appointments myself. Dad's death was real. And her grief was real. I'd stake my license on it. She mixed her lies with true things the way you cut a drug to stretch it, and that's why none of us caught the taste. And then Renee told me the one I didn't know, and this is the only time that night I felt something other than cold. A few months after Dad died, Renee found her at the kitchen table with the calendar, the big one from the bank with the kittens on it, and it was blank. A whole month, white as a field. And Mom looked up at her and said, "Your father was dead 3 days before anyone called me back." 3 days. I did the math and it was probably true. We were drowning. All of us. Funeral and probate and casseroles. Nobody called the house because the house was where the sadness lived. She sat in it alone for 3 days, and I think something in her decided, never again, and started building sirens. I held that thought gently, the way I'd hold anyone's broken thing. Then Renee said, "I keep trying to feel sorry for her, Liv." Then I remember she watched me cry about that camp for a month. Yeah, both things were true, only one of them was our responsibility. Before I tell you what my mother said when I stood in her kitchen the next morning, I want to ask you something. Just between us. If a sentence like, "After everything we've done for you," has ever been handed to you like a bill for your own childhood, put the word "bill" in the comments. I read every one of them, and I promise you, the comment section under stories like this is the least lonely place on the internet. All right. Kettering. 12 minutes, 4 stoplights, 1 speech I rehearsed and never gave. She was at the counter watering her violets when I walked in, And she said, "Coffee?" Like it was any Tuesday, and I put my phone on the counter with the screenshot open and said nothing at all. My mother put on her glasses. She read it top to bottom. No flinch, no color change. A woman reviewing minutes from a meeting she chaired. Then she took her glasses off, folded them, and slid the phone back to me. "Well," she said, "it's rude to read other people's mail." That was the apology portion of the morning. And then, when I just stood there, she straightened her spine, and she gave me the closest thing to a confession I will ever get from Judith Sorensen. "Everything I have ever done was to hold this family together. You scattered. All of you. Somebody had to be the reason you still showed up. I did what mothers do. Someday you'll understand." I looked for shame in her face the way you look for a pulse, methodically, in more than one place. It wasn't there. And then she smiled, tidy and terrible, and said the thing that told me exactly how deep this went. "Renee will forgive me by Sunday. She always needs me by Sunday." I picked up my phone. At the door I stopped, and I didn't yell, because you can't outshout a church bell. I said, "Graduation is Friday. Come if you want. Come as a guest, not as a creditor." Driving home, my hands were steady on the wheel, and that scared me more than shaking ever had. Here's what I expected on Friday: an empty seat and a story about her blood pressure making the rounds by Saturday. Here's what I got instead. My mother arrived at the field house 40 minutes early, in the floral dress she saves for weddings, and took a seat in the second row, dead center. She waved at Eli's friends by name. She filmed the processional on her phone, narrating softly to the grandmother next to her. "That one's mine, the tall one. He's going to Purdue." She glowed. If you'd met her that afternoon, you'd have wanted her for your own grandma, and that's not an insult to you. It's her gift. I sat 2 seats down and understood something that took the air out of me. The ultimatum had never been about staying away. Staying away was leverage, and showing up was leverage, and there was no move she could make that wasn't leverage, because the game was the whole board. Guests don't exist in her world. Only creditors. After the caps went up and the gym emptied onto the lawn, she found us for photos. She stepped into the frame next to Eli, hand ready for his shoulder, and my son did a thing so small and so seismic that only 3 people on Earth felt the ground move. He smiled, polite as ever, and said, "I'd like one with just Mom and Dad first." That's all. No scene. She stood outside the frame while the shutter clicked, and for the length of that click, nobody rearranged the world to make room for her, and I watched her experience that for possibly the first time since Eisenhower. She left before the cake pops. No goodbye. That night, she called Eli's phone at 9. He looked at it ring. He let it. And then he went back to rolling socks into his pack, and God help me, I let him let it. She called my phone at 11, and I knew before I answered what genre we'd be in. The small voice, the frightened breathing pitched perfectly for a nurse's ear. "Livy," she said, a name she uses twice a decade. "I don't feel right. My heart's doing that flutter. Maybe it's nothing. With everything happening, I keep thinking, what if I don't have many chances left to make this right?" 20 years, that script had worked. It worked because it was aimed at the exact joint in me where the nurse meets the daughter and both of them are on call. I sat on the edge of my bed, in the dark, next to my sleeping husband, and I listened all the way through. The flutter. The dizziness that moved when I asked about it. The sigh. "Don't worry about me. You have the party tomorrow." And I heard it. Finally. For what it was. A fire alarm wired to a doorbell button. And I said the sentence I had never once, in 42 years, been able to say. "Mom, you are not in an emergency. You haven't been in one for years. And I'm not coming." Silence. Long enough to reroute a river. Then her voice came back with the temperature dropped out of it. "I see. Well, I hope you can live with this conversation, Olivia." She hung up. I sat there, and then I did something that mattered more than the sentence. I opened my laptop, went into my bank, and canceled the autopay that had been running since 2019. Then I wrote her an email. Short, awake at midnight. Sunday dinner at our house. Every week, 6 o'clock. your chair at the table. Planned help whenever you need it. Rides, doctors, groceries. I will love you on a schedule for the rest of your life. The emergency line is closed. I hit send, and the old contract, the one signed in guilt before I could walk, dissolved. She read it as a declaration of war. I know that now. Saturday proved it. The party was Saturday evening, our backyard, and it was everything the 18th birthday should have been. String lights Mark had finally hung straight after 3 tries. 2 folding tables borrowed from the church, which felt like irony you could eat off of. 40 people, give or take. Dale from the hardware store, half the pediatric floor, bearing a sheet cake shaped like a mountain because nurses commit. And Renee, early, with both kids, which had not happened in years. She came at 4 to help set up, and we stood side by side slicing fruit, no switchboard between us, talking to each other in our own words for the first time since maybe high school, and Maddie ran the yard shrieking with Sam behind her like a duckling. At some point, Renee bumped my hip and said, "Scraps, huh?" And we laughed until the knife wasn't safe. By the back door sat Eli's pack, fully loaded, boots laced through the straps, because the boys were leaving at 5 the next morning. Kids kept going over to it like it was a celebrity. He'd taped his route card to the top flap, and I'd catch him touching the buckle now and then, the way you'd touch a passport. At 6:10, over the music and the grill smoke, I heard it. A car door, out front. Not slammed. Closed. Firmly, the way a gavel comes down in a courtroom where the judge has already decided. Renee's head came up. Mark's tongue stopped mid-flip. And around the side of the house came my mother, in her Sunday best, carrying an enormous gift box wrapped in silver paper, big as a microwave, bow like a satellite dish, and wearing the smile I have spent my entire life learning to read the weather in. She worked the yard like a candidate. Hugs for the neighbors, compliments for the nurses. You girls are angels, I always say it. Candy from her purse for Maddie and Sam, and I watched my sister go rigid as her children took it, torn between manners and biology. The silver box got carried to the gift table with ceremony and set dead center, dwarfing everything, a monument among souvenirs. And then, before the burgers were even off the grill, came the sound I'd been bracing for since the car door. A spoon, ringing against a glass. Ting, ting, ting. The yard hushed. My mother stood in the string lights, glass raised, lovely, silver-haired, and began. To my grandson Eli. Warm murmur. Who worked so hard, and grew so tall, and got so smart. Pause. Sculpted like marble. And who leaves his family behind this summer? Oh, forgive me. Little laugh, hand to her chest. Follows his dreams. That's what we're calling it now. Half the yard laughed, the half that didn't know. The other half studied the grass. Patty called out, "Amen." My mother sailed on. Something about how she prayed he'd someday learn what mattered, raised her glass to family, the ones who stay, and drank. Later, while people mingled, Eli opened gifts, and when he lifted the lid off the silver monument, the tissue paper parted around a picture frame. Heavy, ornate, gold. Inside it, a photograph of Judith in a hospital chair holding a newborn. Him, engraved into the metal at the bottom, in cursive that must have cost extra, "Don't forget who held you first." The yard did that thing where everyone says, "Aw," because the alternative is silence. Eli read the engraving twice. Then he looked up, found her eyes across the lawn, and said clearly, "Thanks, Grandma. Mom was in the bed, right?" I got to her before the next round of ringing glass, took her elbow gently, the way I take elbows for a living, and steered us behind the bean trellis, where the string lights don't quite reach. And in the shadow, the mask came off so fast I heard it hit the ground. "Cancel the trip," she said. "No syrup left, just the bare wire underneath. He listens to you. One phone call to those boys' parents and this ends. Renee needs him." I told everyone he'd step up. "Olivia, if that child gets in that car tomorrow morning, you have no mother. Do you hear me? None." And there it was, the whole religion in one breath. Attendance as ransom, love as invoice, and now excommunication as the final markdown. She searched my face for the flinch. It's always been there. That flinch. Standard equipment on the daughter model she ordered. She'd cached it at Thanksgiving tables and hospital bedsides, and one Christmas when I was 25, and she reached for it now with total confidence. The way you flip a light switch in your own house. After everything this family has done for you, she began, and I just let the sentence sit there. Didn't pick it up. It's amazing. The sound an old key makes scratching at a lock you've finally changed. You're my mother, I said. Tomorrow you'll still be my mother, and tomorrow morning he'll be in Virginia. Both things are going to be true at the same time, Mom. That's the new arrangement. She stared at me the way you'd stare at a vending machine that ate your dollar, and then she rebuilt her face bone by bone, turned, and walked back into the light, spine straight, greeting a neighbor by name on the way. I stood behind the trellis and let out one long breath. I thought the war was over. I'd forgotten that my mother has never once left a stage without a final act. At 8:04, Mark carried out the cake. The mountain one, from my night shift crew, with a hiker made of frosting halfway up the side and stuck along the summit, 18 candles, because Eli had grinned and said, "We never got to light these ones properly." Everybody crowded in. Phones came up. Renee corralled Sam onto her hip. Mark flicked the lighter and the little flames stood up one by one, and 40 people took a breath to sing. The crash came from my left. A glass, hitting the patio stones. And then my mother, gripping the edge of the folding table so hard it jumped, her other hand climbing to her chest, fingers spread, clutching. Her face had gone gray, not pale. Gray, the color I know better than any color in the world. The color that means the night is about to become paperwork. She took one loud, ragged breath, said, something's wrong, and went down into the nearest chair like a puppet with a cut string. Patty screamed. Someone knocked over the lemonade. A neighbor shouted about calling an ambulance, and a nurse from my floor started forward on reflex and then stopped. Because every face in that yard, all 40 of them, one after another, did the same thing. They turned and looked at me. The nurse, the daughter, the one who'd know what to do. The candles hissed on the mountain. Sam started to cry somewhere behind me, and I stood in the grass with 20 years of training in my hands and 42 years of my mother in my chest, and I understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that this moment had been built for me. An audience, a crisis, a boy with a backpack by the door, and a car coming at 5 a.m. 1 second. That's what I had. And I used it to decide, once and forever, which of those two women walked toward that chair. Both of them walked, as it turns out. But the nurse got there first. I knelt in the grass beside her chair and I did my job. Fully. Gently. The way I have done it 10,000 times for other people's mothers. 2 fingers to her wrist. Eyes on my watch. Mom, look at me. Where is it? Point with 1 finger. Her eyes found mine, wet and enormous. The yard held its breath around us. Her pulse tapped against my fingers, and I counted it the way you count when nothing else in the world exists. 84. Steady. Strong as a metronome. Skin warm, dry. Lips pink. Breathing fast but even, and evening out further the longer I held her gaze. Does it go down your arm? She nodded. Which arm? A pause, a beat too long, and her hand drifted left. Then, when my expression didn't change, corrected right. The pain, when I pressed where she pointed, moved. Pain doesn't check the audience, friends. I've knelt next to real ones in parking lots and pews and a Cracker Barrel once, and real ones don't watch you like a card player. So I leaned in close. So close only she could hear me over the candles guttering on that cake, and I said it softly. The voice I use for frightened children at 2 a.m. Here's what happens now, Mom. I will drive you to the emergency room myself right now, and I will sit with you all night, like last month. And when the tests come back clean, you and I are done with emergencies, forever. Sunday dinners, planned visits, real help, any week you name. I will love you for the rest of your life, but I will never answer a siren from you again. I know the difference between an emergency and a habit. So tell me, And whatever you tell me, I'm going to believe you in front of all these people. Is this an emergency? The string lights ticked in the quiet. 40 people watched a woman kneel by her mother's chair and could not hear a word. And my mother looked at me for a long, long moment, and down at the bottom of her eyes, underneath the performance, I saw something flicker that I choose to believe was respect, caught red-handed. She patted my hand. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and announced to the yard, in a voice you could have heard from the street, "Don't be dramatic, Olivia. I'm fine." She collected her purse from the gift table, and she walked out through the gate, past the cake, past the candles, past 40 silent guests, and for the first time in the history of our family, nobody ran after her. I stood up, brushed the grass off my knees, and heard my own voice say, "Steady. Okay, who wants cake?" My hands didn't start shaking until the third slice. At 10 to 5 the next morning, the sky was still the color of a bruise healing, and my kitchen smelled like coffee and sunscreen. Eli came down the hall with his boots already on, quiet out of habit, though nobody was sleeping. Mark was pretending to check the weather. I was pretending I hadn't been up since 3, and then my son did the thing I didn't know I was waiting for. He opened his bedroom door, peeled the trail map off the inside of it, careful with the tape, folded it along its worn creases into a square, and zipped it into the top pocket of his pack. 2 years on that door. It looked strange, the bare rectangle left behind, like a picture taken down after a long marriage. He hugged Mark. He let me hold on one extra second. And at the door, with headlights already swinging into our driveway, and some other mother's minivan idling at the curb, he stopped. "You okay?" he said. "If she never comes back, you okay with that?" My son, 18 years old, boots on, mountain waiting, still running triage on everybody else on his way out the door. I told him the truest thing I had. "I'm okay being your mother more than her daughter. Should have picked sooner. Go." He grinned, and it was Frank's grin, my dad handing it down through us like a map of his own, and then the van swallowed him, and the taillights went down our street and turned, and the sound of it faded into birds. I stood on the porch in the cool air. My phone buzzed in my robe pocket, and I flinched. Old reflex. Sirens die slow. It wasn't her. It was Renee. "Kids are up. We're coming for pancakes. Don't you dare make the mix kind." 9 days later, a minivan pulled up and a young man got out of it wearing my son's face, 3 shades browner, 1 scraped knee, some new way of standing. They'd made Mount Rogers on day 9 in fog and eaten crushed Pop-Tarts on the summit, and he talked at dinner. Actually, talked, arms going, and Mark and I sat there like people at a concert. On June 24th, he put on his good shirt and drove downtown to the 3rd floor of the Halverson building, and when the panel asked their famous question, "Tell us about something you planned and finished," he laid his route cards on the table. Budget sheets, resupply math, the wet boot contingency. Then one of the panelists, going off script, asked if anything had almost stopped him. Eli said, and he told me this in the car, "Some people wanted me to cancel." Learning when no is the responsible answer, that was the hardest part of the project. 3 weeks into July, the envelope came. He read it on the porch, then handed it to me and studied the yard while I screamed enough for both of us. Tuition gap, covered, 4 years, renewable. My mother went silent for 6 weeks. No calls, no sirens, no choir. Patty tried to run the old play at me once. "Your poor mother, abandoned at a party." But it fell apart mid-sentence because Renee had gotten to her first, with the screenshot and the Little Pines paperwork, and had said, in words I'd have paid money to hear, "Aunt Patty, she canceled my kids' camp herself. I'm done being her ambulance. Liv is done being her wallet." When the choir loses its soloist, it gets very quiet. Then, on a Thursday in late July, my phone rang, and it was her. And my whole body braced out of habit, and her voice was ordinary. Small talk voice. "I was thinking," she said, as if 6 weeks were 6 minutes, "about this Sunday. Is that offer still open?" She came at 6. She brought rolls from the store rolls. My mother, who once baked for a governor's fundraiser. And I understood the rolls were the closest thing to a white flag her hands could carry. She sat in the guest chair, not the head. She asked Mark about the garage. She was, for 1 hour, a grandmother at a dinner. She only reached for the old script once, when the pot roast came out and she started, "You know, after everything." And then the sentence just ran out of road, because nobody at the table picked it up. Not me, not Renee. It fell on the floor and lay there, and she looked at it, and she passed the green beans. The emergencies stopped. Not because she transformed. I don't believe in that, and I won't sell it to you. They stopped, I think, because sirens are for people who run, and nobody runs anymore. We walk, on schedule, every Sunday, and it turns out that's a thing she can survive. Renee got the promotion, hired an actual sitter with actual money, and calls me directly every week. No switchboard, no toll. Some Sundays my mother is wonderful. Some Sundays she's a lot. Every Sunday she's a guest. This March, Eli turned 19. He drove home from Purdue with laundry and a beard attempt, and we did the backyard again, small. Burgers, the same string lights. My mother RSVP'd on Tuesday, like everyone else. She came at 4, brought a card with cash in it like grandmothers do, told one good story about my dad and a road map of Kentucky, kissed Eli on the cheek at 5, and drove herself home while it was still light out. No flat tires, no flutters, no calls at 11. I stood at the grill watching her taillights go, and I thought about the sentence she typed by accident. The truest thing she ever said. They only come when something is broken. Because look at this yard. Nothing was broken. And people came anyway. Here's what those 2 years taught me. If you want it in one line, being needed is a bill somebody else writes you. Being loved is a door you can walk through freely. And family, the kind worth keeping, is the second thing. That's my story. 18 birthdays. One screenshot. A map folded into a backpack. If someone in your life only shows up when something's breaking, maybe it's time for the triage question. Is this an emergency or a habit? If this story gave you words you needed, share it with the person who answers every siren. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.